Florida's continuous population growth has resulted in approximately 2.6 million septic tanks. These systems provide wastewater disposal for approximately 1/3 of Floridians. While Florida is home to only 6.5% of the U.S. population, we are home to more than 12% of the nation's septic systems. Many of these systems are located in environmentally sensitive areas. Did you know that even when septic systems are functioning perfectly, they discharge nitrogen into the soil? Too much nitrogen harms our delicate springs by causing overgrowths of algae. Negative impacts to water quality or impairments have been linked as a major concern at the local and state levels of government in Florida. Impairments exist in our springs, lakes, rivers, and coastal areas. It is the responsibility of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, or FDEP, to assess water body impairment. One of the tools the FDEP uses is a process which identifies the total maximum daily load, or TMDL, of water bodies. This process is mandated at the federal level by the Clean Water Act and requires state environmental agencies, like the FDEP, to complete TMDLs for water bodies that are determined to be impaired. The second phase of the TMDL process is to develop a Basin Management Action Plan, or BMAP. BMAPs are the roadmaps of strategies and projects developed to reduce the nutrient load to a water body. FDEP began developing TMDLs in 2008 and reviewed water quality for many of the springs across the state. In 2012, Florida springs began to get serious attention from the state legislature. It was in 2012 the Silver Springs TMDL was developed. Then came the Rainbow Springs TMDL in 2013. Their respective BMAPs were developed by 2015. In response to calls for action by Florida residents, the state legislature intensified their efforts to protect our water bodies. In 2016, Senate Bill 552 was passed and contained the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act. We'll dive deeper into this bill in a few moments. The proximity of Rainbow and Silver Springs and the specific nature of the requirements of the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act led FDEP to revisit the BMAPs for each spring and develop a consolidated BMAP to include both spring sheds. A spring shed is the area of land that contributes groundwater to a spring. Within the two spring sheds, DEP identified priority focus areas, or PFAs. Activities within the PFAs have the highest impacts on the associated springs. In 2019, Governor DeSantis signed an executive order focusing on water quality improvements. This legislation established the 2019 Blue-Green Algae Task Force and led to the approval of Senate Bill 712, or the Clean Waterways Act, during the 2020 legislative session. Let's take a look at the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act of 2016. The Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act was created to accelerate FDEP's work in establishing causes behind the deterioration of the spring's water quality, enhance the importance of the state working with local stakeholders to solve long-time issues, use these local and state partnerships to prevent future activities from further damaging Florida's sensitive water bodies. Here are a few key requirements in the 2016 legislation. FDEP was directed to update or develop TMDLs and BMAPs with projects designed to meet the TMDL within 20 years. The specific nutrient contributors to a spring shed and the areas within the BMAP must be identified by scientific analysis of the contributing loads. Another important aspect of the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act was the creation of an action-related threshold. If the BMAP process determined the total number of on-site sewage treatment and disposal systems, also called septic tanks, accounted for more than 20% of the spring's nutrient load, then an OSTDS remediation plan must be developed. BMAPs for both Rainbow and Silver Springs tripped the 20% threshold for septic system impact, with Rainbow at 20% and Silver at 29%. Rainbow and Silver Springs were two of the 31 springs specifically identified in this legislation that were required to be addressed. We're proud to say that Marion County was ahead of many areas in Florida in that county leaders had already put in place numerous spring protection measures. These initiatives focus on preventing the continued increases in the contaminant loads going to Rainbow and Silver Springs. Rainbow Springs is located in the southwestern part of Marion County and just north of Dunellen. Rainbow's BMAP extends into Levy County, shown on this map as a red boundary. Rainbow's primary focus area, shown with the gold boundary, is entirely within Marion County. Marion County's world-famous Silver Springs once had the largest output of any spring in the world. The BMAP created for Silver Springs is shown with the green boundary and extends north into Alachua County and south into parts of Lake and Sumter counties. The blue boundary, right in the heart of Marion County, is the primary focus area of Silver Springs. Rainbow and Silver Springs, like others around the state, have experienced environmental devastation from a variety of contaminants. These issues created a nutrient load to the springs, which resulted in algae blooms, impaired water quality, loss of habitat, and even restrictions on use due to water quality concerns. Corrective action must be taken to bring these springs back to life, but where does local government begin? To answer that question, we look to one of the parts carried over from 2016's Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act and required in 2020's Clean Waterways Act, remediation plans. The Clean Waterways Act requires that remediation plans are created in primary focus areas with 20% or more contributions coming from septic systems. Remember, the septic system impact for Rainbow Springs is 20% and Silver Springs 29%. Since the technical name for a septic tank is On-Site Sewage Treatment and Disposal System, the abbreviation OSTDS is often used to refer to septic tanks and septic systems. So what is an OSTDS remediation plan? An OSTDS remediation plan is a process which identifies septic tanks within a given spring shed, identifies priority focus area boundaries of the associated spring shed, and determines the corrective actions that must be taken to reduce the nutrient load coming from the identified septic tank to a level that will not negatively impact the nearby spring. Remediation plans must contain certain elements such as an evaluation of credible scientific information on the effect of nutrients, particularly forms of nitrogen, on springs and spring systems. Options including septic tank upgrade or replacement, or connecting to a central sewage system. A public education plan for residents about OSTDS and springs. Cost-effective projects to reduce the nutrient impacts from OSTDS, and a priority ranking of each project for funding. The completion of TMDL and BMAP process for Rainbow and Silver Springs has helped the FDEP identify major contributing factors to be addressed by an OSTDS remediation plan. Let's take a look at what contributing factors the FDEP identified for the Rainbow Springs shed, which includes the Rainbow Springs Group and the Rainbow River. As we mentioned earlier, the original total maximum daily load was adopted in 2013, identifying significant negative water quality impacts. The original Basin Management Action Plan was adopted in 2015. Then, priority focus areas were established and the nitrogen contributors were identified, with the major nitrogen contributors identified as cattle farms, septic systems, and horse farms. Now let's take a look at the Silver Springs shed, including the Head Springs, Silver Springs Group, and the Upper Silver River. The original total maximum daily load was adopted in 2012, identifying significant negative water quality impacts. The original Basin Management Action Plan was adopted in 2015. A priority focus area was established, and the nitrogen contributors were identified, with the major nitrogen contributors identified as septic systems and cattle farms. The Basin Management Action Plans for Rainbow and Silver Springs were combined in 2018. And, per 2016's Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act, the OSTDS remediation plan was required. Marion County was one of 9 counties to receive a grant from FDEP to tackle some of the required remediation plan components. And with that funding, a study containing public education, identification of remediation options, and realistic solutions began. The first step in the study is to identify which of Marion County's 100,000 septic tanks are found within the Rainbow and Silver Springs primary focus areas. These potential project areas were then systematically reviewed based on nutrient loading to the associated spring and the cost of upgrading the area's septic systems compared to the cost of connecting homes in the focus area to a centralized sewer system. Project areas were ranked in priority using factors such as whether or not the project counted toward the FDEP's BMAP goal, qualified for grant funding, and made the largest impact on total nitrogen reduction. The priority ranking also factored in each area's cost effectiveness with respect to all other projects. For the Rainbow Springs Spring Shed, Marion County has not yet identified and prioritized project areas for septic to sewer conversion in the Rainbow Springs Spring Shed, though projects may have been identified in this area by other entities. Under the county's plan, septic tanks within the Rainbow Springs Spring Shed would be identified for upgrade to advanced treatment either through aerobic treatment units or a passive treatment system within the system drain field. Within the Silver Springs Spring Shed, 5 areas were identified for consideration for development of a septic to sewer project. The remaining areas in this spring shed were selected for upgrade to advanced treatment either through aerobic treatment units or a passive treatment system within the system drain field. Additional grant funding will be pursued for those areas identified for septic to sewer conversion. The affected community's residents and business owners will be asked to participate in public discussions to determine how or if those projects would be viable for development. In addition to the pursuit of grant dollars to offset project capital costs, the county is working with FDEP to develop a grant program to assist residents with the cost of connecting to a centralized system or upgrading to an advanced treatment septic disposal system. Our next steps will be based on the feedback the county receives from our residents and input from state regulatory agencies. Marion County continues to develop projects and programs that protect our springs while striving to mitigate the financial impact to our residents and business owners. If you have questions regarding the state legislative mandates of the Florida Springs and Aquifer Protection Act, the Clean Waterways Act, and what Marion County is doing to comply with these mandates, please email us at www.study@marioncountyfl.org.